when the awakening happens, what we're waking up to is the nature of unbound consciousness. Meaning before that, we are bound by consciousness, we are identified with thought, but in a way that feels rather dualistic, in a way that feels like struggle, that feels like seeking, that feels like clinging, that feels like having to defend yourself, that feels like having to be hypervigilant, that feels confusing, and also dissociated and numb. So all of that, all those qualities of the way consciousness is used before a shift or an awakening will be seen through or eased significantly with that shift, with that first shift. And then the experiential insight of that shift will feel like unbound consciousness. It doesn't necessarily lead to a conclusion that consciousness is the background of experience or is the primary substance of experiencing essentially the eternalistic view. It doesn't necessarily compel you to believe that, but it's very easy to convince yourself of it without really looking closely at what's happening. What you are aware of is that the experience of consciousness itself has this experiential texture of the infinite, of infinity, of being unbound. And strangely, even though I'm saying that it doesn't lead to an eternalistic view, I'm going to use the word differently. The eternalistic view doesn't really mean eternity in the way I usually use the term. The eternalistic view simply means that consciousness is that continues through lifetime after lifetime, that permeates everything, that actually gives rise to everything, even physicality. This isn't just an old, view from 2,500 years ago. Many contemporary people hold this view, including scientists who do work in consciousness, including people who've had awakenings. It just seems like that's the case, right? So when I use the word eternity, I don't mean the eternalistic view specifically. When I use the word eternal or eternity, I mean the experience of timelessness, being outside of time. In philosophy, many years ago, I learned the distinction between eternity and immortality. And the idea of immortality is continuous life or continuous, let's say, consciousness or one narrative of a being or a knowing that just goes on forever within time, right? But eternity means not subject to time at all, like outside of the experience of time and space, or time specifically, but it ends up being outside of time and space. So I want to be clear, when I use the word eternity or eternal, it's experiential and it's obvious. And when we do have that shift, that Kensho shift, that awakening to the experience of unbound consciousness, of pure being, of pure knowingness, however you want to say it, it does have this eternal experience to it. The sense of not being subject to time and seeing that time is totally thought-bound is part of the experience. But that is not the eternalistic view we're talking about. The eternalistic view we're talking about that gets deconstructed here is the sense that consciousness is a background, that it's the basis of all experience, that it's primary or something like that. And that will be seen through. It does feel like that for a while, and you can easily conclude that. But the deeper insights, specifically the aggregates and why I talk about this stuff, and why I talk about anatta and no self-realization and non-duality and all of it, is because you can easily overlook those insights with that conclusion. So hopefully I'm clear about what I mean there. But you don't have to understand the eternalistic view, which is a sort of a philosophical description of something that's more like the immortal view rather than eternal view. But anyway, it's a philosophical designation, and you don't have to worry about that so much. It's more about feeling into what I'm talking about here. So with all of that said, when I talk about consciousness as the fifth aggregate, I'm not referring to the first awakening. I'm not referring to that first shift where we do experience consciousness or being as unbound, as all-inclusive, as outside of time, as timeless, and also as sometimes even sort of non-dualistic. It may feel like it spills over into the physical world for a while. Often that's experiential, and it will kind of go away after a first awakening for some time, the experience of non-duality. But usually it's just tastes of it you get until deeper stages of insight. So I'm talking about the deeper stages of insight when I talk about this fifth aggregate. So I just want to be clear about that. I'm not negating the importance that I see and others see in that first shift and awakening and the nature of consciousness itself. It's just that this insight is deeper than that. It's more subtle in a sense, but it's also available for you to realize, for sure. So the way it's broken down in the suttas, I think, is really good. And I had never made this correlation, but in my book, I do describe the reflective nature of mind, the reflective nature of thought, as reflecting one of the five senses or reflecting another thought. That's what it's doing, right? In the suttas, in the Pali Canon, they would describe it as, or I guess Buddha described it as, consciousness co-arises or interdependently appears with the object of consciousness, which could be sight consciousness, hearing, smell consciousness, taste consciousness, sensation, like feeling consciousness or sensing consciousness, and then cognizing, right? So there's cognizing consciousness, or cognition, the process of cognition, the process of seeing, the process of hearing, the process of smelling, the process of tasting. And I think it's good to think of them as processes when we think of them in regard to this particular aggregate, in the sense that they do arise with, they do codependently arise with consciousness. The consciousness of a process makes it seem like there's a process there, and vice versa. Without the consciousness, there won't be anything to be aware of a process, right? So they are codependently arising or appearing. Yeah. I will make this distinction too, because the Bahia Sutta, which is a very famous Buddhist sutta, maybe one of the most famous in the Pali Canon, very clearly states that in the seen there is only the seen, in the heard there is only the heard, in the felt there is only the felt, in the cognized there's only the cognized. And that is in contrast to what we're talking about experientially. And what I mean by that is exactly what he said there. The sound, with clear no self and non-dual realization, the sound is just merely appearing. It's not a process. It's just there, right? It's not even arising. It's just the sound as it is. We could call it bare appearing or something like that. In contrast, the experience of having a process of hearing, right, is specifically recognizing the interplay of consciousness with, we could say that, the apparatus of hearing, right? So it feels or it seems like a process when there is a reification of that consciousness as self. That's the key. It's all about identity, as I always point out. It's like if there's an identity or identity structure that still feels like I am the conscious one, right? Even if the I is an infinite I or something, that I am the conscious one, or consciousness is the one aware of, and it has a sense of continuity that's actually existing, right? As long as that's there, which I would just call the subtle self. That's the subtle self. The fundamental sense that encapsulates all other experience, that turns everything into mine, right? In Kevin Shanelek's way of describing the fetters, it would be the eighth fetter. So my point is the difference between in the seen, there's only the seen, in the felt, there's only the felt, in the cognized, there's only the cognized, which is the Bahia Sutta, and the fifth aggregate, which is that consciousness is co-arising with the apparatus of hearing, with the apparatus of seeing, with the apparatus of smelling. The co-arising is the process. That is what makes it process-like. And it's also what makes it feel like, if you don't clearly see what's happening and truly see through this fifth aggregate, it will feel like that consciousness is primary. It will feel like that. It's not a conceptual thing. It's not a philosophical argument. It's a felt experience. It seems like it's a felt experience. And you have to look very, very closely usually for that felt experience to subside. It will, and it can, but that's why I have a whole playlist on no self-realization.